As you heard in my bio, I'm former military. I'm a graduate of West Point, the United States Military Academy. I served in the aftermath of the first Gulf War. And I also served as a chaplain in the U.S. military, one of our nation's first Muslim chaplains. But not only am I myself a former military, but the military tradition now is rather rooted in my family. My younger brother is also a graduate of West Point. I have another younger brother who today currently serves on active duty as a doctor. He's a military doctor serving at Fort Hood in Texas. And my father, as I mentioned, who was a US-born citizen, also served in the US Army when he was drafted during World War II. So all of the men, all of the males in my family have served in the US military and have in some way made contributions towards the security of this country. And I'm also a Muslim convert. I converted to Islam after having been raised Lutheran, one of the more liturgical Protestant denominations. I converted to Islam back in 1991, and that story, my journey to Islam, in and of itself is a whole presentation on its own. And perhaps one day I'll have the opportunity to come with you and share with all of you my journey to Islam, how I became a Muslim. But let's talk today about Islamophobia. I put together a presentation on the topic, really on a lot of what has been going on in our country, in this area, throughout the nation, in the last few weeks and few months, Islamophobia. This, I just put together a couple pictures to show a lot of what the non-Muslim public views as Islam. And a lot of these photos actually depict and demonstrate how people fear Islam today. Not too long ago on the cover of Time magazine, we saw this. Is America Islamophobic? So no doubt this is a conversation that is taking place in the media, in our country, in our academic institutions, and in our communities. But here's how I would describe Islamophobia or define it as an irrational fear and hostility towards not only Islam, but also towards Muslims. And that leads to some of these things, like discrimination, profiling, violation of constitutional rights, religious rights, hate crimes, some of which have most recently turned violent, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those incidents. And anti-Muslim rhetoric, hate speech that we hear on the radio by shock jock journalists and radio hosts, and even from many of our elected officials. Okay. But as we heard in some of the previous comments by our panelists, Islamophobia is nothing new. And it happened, yes, before 9/11. Okay. The worst attack on U.S. soil before 9/11 was actually in Oklahoma. The tragic bombing of the Alfred T. Murrow Federal Building, in which Muslims had nothing to do with. But yet the very first group that was blamed or suggested had a part in this attack where 168 people were killed, including 19 children, were Muslims. It was carried out by two non-Muslims, that of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. What's not known are some of the things that happened in Oklahoma during the time of this bombing, or right after the bombing, when it was suggested that Muslims carried out this attack. Like, for example, a Jordanian-American Muslim from Oklahoma who happened to have been at the time in the UK, in Britain, was immediately detained and sent back home. And when he returned back to his home city of Oklahoma, and people found out that he had been detained and returned to the U.S. His wife was spit on, his house was attacked, and whatnot. Another incident that happened in Oklahoma during that time following this attack was a pregnant Muslim woman who was in the 3rd trimester of her pregnancy, lost her baby due to a miscarriage when a mob of angry people attacked the house, throwing bricks at the home. Right? There were reports, like immigration, for example, U.S. immigration putting out that they were searching for individuals of a, quote, Middle Eastern type description. Right? All of this led into Muslims being initially blamed for this Oklahoma bombing. As I mentioned, sometimes we do hear that anti-Muslim rhetoric, even from our elected officials. I was recently living in Washington State. I recently moved back to New Jersey, the state in which I grew up in. I grew up in Springfield, Union County. But I was living in Washington State while I served in the U.S. military and a little bit after I got out of the military. And while I was there, one of our prominent imams of Washington State, Imam Muhammad Joban from Indonesia, was invited to give an invocation to open the legislative session of that day. And when he did so, 2 of the state representatives, the state elected officials, walked out. One of them was this individual, her name Lois McMahon. And when she was asked why she walked out of this prayer given by a Muslim imam, her response was, it was a matter of patriotism, or it was an issue of patriotism, quote, suggesting that it was her patriotic duty as an American to walk out of this prayer because it was being given by a Muslim. Right? She got a lot of criticism nationally from doing so. But there was a second individual who also walked out of that prayer. And when this individual was asked why he walked out of the prayer, his response was, well, Muhammad is not my God. But for those who are not Muslim here, I would like to inform you that Muhammad is not my God either. Nor is Muhammad the God of Muslims. Right? This demonstrates the ignorance that even our elected officials have about our faith, about the Muslim faith, about Islam, believing that Muslims worship Muhammad. Right? So there's a severe lack of knowledge here. Here's someone who's actually in Congress in the United States legislative body. Representative from California has said in response to an interview on the air, you know, what can the United States do, for example, if Muslims were to attack the United States with a nuclear weapon? His response was that, well, we could, quote, take out Islamic holy sites. Like, for example, bombing Mecca, as if that would solve anything. This is coming from an elected official at the national level. In this country, the Muslim Americans did make some political gains in the year of 2006 when the state of Minnesota elected the first American Muslim to Congress, Mr. Keith Ellison from the 5th District of Minneapolis. Right? He was elected in 2006. And when he won that election, one of the first things he did was he publicly announced that he would take his oath swearing on the Holy Quran. Okay? And when he did so, a member of Congress who was already in this legislative body made some very negative comments. He said that he basically suggested that Representative-elect Keith Ellison's desire to use the Quran during the swearing-in ceremonies was a threat to the, quote, values and the beliefs, or belief traditional to the United States of America. He was upset that a Muslim American would take his oath on the Holy Quran. When Christian representatives are elected, sometimes they swear on the Bible. Jews, sometimes on the Jewish Bible. Others don't swear on any book, some on the Constitution. Keith Ellison announced he would take his oath on the Quran. And when he received